Sophie, hello everyone. Yeah, really pleased actually to get a chance to share some of what I know about this topic. I've been in the world of innovation for more than 30 years in the private sector, the public sector, and the non-profit sector in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. So in understanding all of those things, for me, the most amazing moments are always when you get cross-pollination, when you get the sort of collaboration between the sectors. So I hope really well that I can sort of add to what excellent stuff we just heard from Rakesh and Sophie. Because these collaborations don't naturally happen. There are loads of forces preventing them. So in this short talk, I just want to share some examples and ideas really about how effectively large mature organizations can connect with small immature organizations. For me, that's the sort of the heart of the challenge. And obviously, as we're sort of saying, how large can learn from small. I should make it completely clear at this juncture that, I am not, and my team are not the detailed procurement experts that Rakesh and Bloom are and others like them. But the point is that we have worked with these cultures, these very, very different cultures for many years. And so really in the spirit of user-centered design, if you don't understand the people, if you don't understand the organizations and the cultures, how can you bring them together? So what we do is we act as partners to try and create these collaborations, and I'll explain a bit more about that at the moment. But what we often do is work in partnership with procurement organizations to co-design those processes and to do the scouting that we began to hear about, really to find the startups with the best fit. So I'm going to share perspectives from my time as Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, because we ran innovation programs from the Home Office and the Department of Health, and that now being 17 years ago, you can see actually what happened. I shall share perspectives from PlusX Innovation, where I currently am, as Sophie sort of indicated, we sort of create cross-cutting innovation communities, trying to bring all these different cultures together. And we do this physically, but we also do this via sort of hybrid programs, sort of accelerators and open innovation processes. So I think many of you in a conference like this should be somewhat familiar with a slide. We know that if you go back sort of 10, 20, 30 years, innovation was all supposed to be about something called the triple helix. Big government, big business, large academic institutions. Think Harwell or places like that. But we know as innovation has come into urban environments that actually we need to think about the communities, community groups, individuals. How are they going to benefit from all of this in terms of the jobs, in terms of perhaps being the beneficiaries of the services? But also, when we think about business, it is not just about the corporates. It is about the startups and the scale-ups. So ultimately, not only are we dealing with a slightly wider range of cultures to bring together, but also we're dealing with much more different scales. And for me, again, scales are such an important thing to understand and to get around. And they really can be woven together. This is what we do. Just a particular example about big and small. In Brighton, where Sophie and I met, we're really pleased that The Body Shop, a global beauty brand, has just moved its global headquarters into our building. Why? Because unfortunately they've been into administration and back out again. They had a very difficult time coming out from ownership of L'Oreal and Natura. But the most fantastic thing about the new organization, which has this global ambition, but a much sort of smaller team, is they recognize the need to collaborate, as Rakesh was talking about just now. They need to look outwards. And actually, of course, we can begin to connect them with all these fantastic startups and scale-ups that can be part of their supply chain. So I want to talk about the alignment of interest, and I want to start with a very simple idea. So firstly, why should public sector leaders be interested in innovations from startups? That's sort of the exam question. So I am utterly amazed, having been in the space for so long, quite how many times the word innovation is being used at a conference like this. And I love it. But on the other hand, actually, I think we need a few more words. We used to say modernization, progress, improvement, development. I think innovation is being used in a very generalized way. So I want to focus it in a little bit here, especially in the context of procurement. Because ultimately, whether it's the new technologies, the new operation models, all of those sorts of things, the bottom line is that successful innovations are adopted, if we want to use NHS terminology, adopted and diffused, when they reduce cost, increase speed, or make things really better. And the most successful innovations don't just improve things incrementally. They are radically faster, cheaper, better. So, of course, this is hugely aligned, as we all know, with the needs of the public leaders. We know that so many public services have huge demands upon them with fewer resources. Radically more cost-effective solutions are needed. But, as we've already heard via Rakesh and Sophie, this does take the political leadership to set the target as ambitious as a 10x target or a 50x target. I think if I'm to sort of join in with the provocation, I think we should be aligned in the level of ambition, but I'm not sure we are always there. So then secondly, why startups? Well, we might imagine, as we've heard already, that amazing new innovations only come from the experts in the field, the incumbents. But actually, there's a huge disruptive power from the ambitious outsider, the new entrant to the market. This is something especially I've been working on, at least for the last 15 years, if not the last 30 years. So, we know the examples. Motorola used to be the biggest phone company in the world. And then a Finnish conglomerate that used to sell things like car tires started making phones smaller and cheaper. They were called Nokia. And then an American computer company started making phones that were bigger and more expensive. But they were really better, a hell of a lot better, so they got away with it, right? And now they're one of the market leaders, along with people like Samsung. Apple is, of course, who I'm talking about. And there are so many other examples of industries that have been disrupted by the outsiders. And whatever you think about Elon Musk's politics, he is an amazing engineer. We know perfectly well what he has done to compete against NASA and Boeing and the whole of the car industry. So I think the disruption of the outsider is real. And this is why we shouldn't underestimate what these disruptive outsiders that start off as startups can do for us. So therefore, the need for radical innovation in the public sector is an all-time high. New entrants to the markets must be encouraged in, because counterintuitively they are, the source of some potentially radically new ideas. And the public sector, therefore, must be lapping up these ideas, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. Because this is the hard bit, in my view. Big and small aren't intentionally incompatible. They just have very different values and very different behaviors. Big organizations typically need to serve a very wide range of customer. They worry hugely about safety and reputation and things like that, and reliability. And this is all extremely rational. Don't get me wrong, they are doing the right thing. Startups, on the other hand, they don't offer scale or robustness. They're typically rejected by the big organization, either public or private. The important insight, I feel, is that while the startup clearly has a less mature solution than the incumbent, it's their speed of learning, the fixing of the mistakes, that is typically way faster. This is the heart of innovation theory, such as described by Clayton Christensen and others. So I often hear the phrase, move fast and break things, that you will know as the sort of the tech bros mantra. I hear it critiqued as arrogant and careless, even callous, by the startups. But while there are arrogant innovators, and perhaps I've described one, the phrase comes from the goal of maximizing learning. It is a very authentic phrase. It tries to convey that worrying too much about failure, about breaking things, can slow learning. And we must find ways to minimize the downside of breaking things so that we can learn as fast as possible. I'm a cyclist. I like to ride fast, therefore I wear a crash helmet and knee pads so that when I do fall off, I don't kill myself. That is incredibly important, right? So there are plenty of ways in which you can mitigate the downside, because going fast can be fun as much as kind of successful and lucrative. So therefore, if we want public services to benefit from these potentially radical improvements, we're going to have to appreciate the apparent immaturity. It's okay. We've got to say that they have new ways of looking at the world. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the speed of improvement, and we need to find the mechanism that supports that speed of improvement. But obviously, this engagement demands resources. It costs time and money, and that's exactly why IPEC and Bloom and others exist, to develop these mechanisms. But again, you have to believe that this is the right thing to do. There is a level of ambition that you have to have here in order to make the most of the startups, of the potential that's around. So that's some of the context as I see it. Let me quickly show you a couple of case studies. The first is actually a regulated corporate, and one where, of course, in 2011, for those of you who know the water industry, the government transferred ownership of more than 150,000 kilometers of sewers and lateral drains into public ownership, but they put it into the management of the mostly private sector water companies. So we were working with Southern Water on this, and Southern Water's assets increased by 50%. You know, with 40% of the network, perhaps up to 17,500 kilometers of their newly acquired sewer network unmapped and missing. So, as Sasha from the team here says, you know, a lack of knowledge about the network makes it more difficult to innovate, to develop smarter and faster ways of dealing with issues like blockages and pollutions, and has the detrimental effect on customers and the environment. So they had to find a way to map the network. And of course, the way they'd been doing it so far was to wait till there was a crisis, go and fix the crisis, and then say, oh, we've got a bit of sewer, let's map it that way. The estimate was that was going to cost them about £50 million, and they were kind of not going to do it because they didn't have the £50 million to invest. So the good news is that Southern Water had set up their own innovation team. They had like an internal innovation team that could also act as a supporter of procurement. And they were the strategists looking into the business also to identify what are the right problems to start with. You know, don't take the most important one, perhaps. Take one just a little bit at the edge that's a little bit safer. So they asked us to help with this, the snappily titled Unmapped Networks Innovation Challenge, and they asked us to help us. And so asked us to help them. So what we did is, of course, we did the usual thing of really trying to set the brief, get the problem right, do the sort of the scouting, the selection, the co-design, the piloting, taking the long list of potential providers and whittling them down. We had everything from drones with thermal imaging cameras to tunneling robots. But the winner was One Spatial. And of course, again, it's an AI solution. They used inference mapping to kind of, you know, guess, effectively, to use a common parlance, of where the sewer networks were. So you had to take the guesses and to validate them, but it worked out very well. And ultimately, with only an investment of £1.5 million, you could map the whole of the 17,000 kilometers of network. So that's, by my estimation, a 35 times productivity increase. And that indicated why it worked. 35x improvement, back to my faster, better, cheaper point. My second case study from my time at the Design Council is back from 2008, 17 years ago, right? So long enough we can see the difference. So in 2008, the government was really interested in reducing hospital-acquired infection. It was a big policy problem. And the NHS Purchasing Agency, supported by the Department of Health, recognized the need for a trusted intermediary. So they came to the Design Council where I was. Again, the brief was pretty simple in some ways, and this was important that it was simple. The insight was that hospital-acquired infections probably were spread because of lack of cleanliness, but that's because things are hard to clean. So the really important thing to do here is to make things easier to clean. So a very simple design thesis, make things simpler to clean. So you'll see here a classic commode at the top, full of nooks and crannies, probably quite cheap to make, but full of nooks and crannies. You see a cardboard prototype in the middle, and you get the eventual one at the bottom by Pearson Lloyd. So essentially what you can see, they've sort of made a big plastic molding that's swoopy so that you can clean it more quickly and more effectively. So there were various other bits of furniture, from patient chairs, bedside cupboards, things like that, and also some sort of quick wins, some sort of dividing screens and blood pressure cuffs, other things, you know, that could move around the hospital, passing the germs around. It was a national competition that was set up, and a panel of expert judges in a range of disciplines, from design to microbiology and clinical expertise. But for me, what's interesting about this context is that the competition that was set up actually before I joined, I sort of evolved this when I came along, was not actually set up for startups to apply. It asked existing manufacturing companies, some of whom were already selling to the NHS, to team up with designers. And what would happen is an existing provider, maybe they made the commode at the top, would have their eyes opened by a fantastic design agency, and they'd find a better solution. The Royal College of Art's Helen Hamlin Design Centre, a sort of healthcare design research unit, was given the task of exploring things like sort of curtains and blood pressure cuffs, the 5 quick wins. Anyway, the very solutions were a great success in terms of publicity, the health secretary proudly launching the products even when they were concepts, to show that something was being done. An important point, I think, that even Rakesh commented on there. So even in conceptual form, these things had value, which is great. but the products themselves, in retrospect, did not sell in huge numbers. 17 years later, I can only see one product, the bedside cabinet, still available on the NHS Procurement website when I checked, in the catalogue when I checked last week. So despite a successful time and motion study and swab analysis of things like the commode, which created clinical evidence that these things were quicker to clean and cleaning was more effective, the products themselves were actually a little bit more expensive. They're about 10 to 20% more expensive. So we've not done cheaper. Have we done better? The cost reduction associated with fewer infections was up to be £1 billion a year. So the size of the prize was huge, right, if we could get infections down. But of course, it's a multifaceted problem. How much could you attribute to the commode or the bedside cabinets or things like that? The issue for me, I think, in the end, and I was reviewing the papers over the past few days, is that really it wasn't big enough. The change wasn't big enough because somehow that £1 billion couldn't be factored into the price of this thing. And anyway, if it was a 10% improvement, not a 100% or 1,000% improvement, did people really get the idea that this was transformative? So I'm not surprised in some ways it didn't work. But actually, I haven't told the whole truth. There were 2 products from that competition that are still being sold. It's just that one of them never made it into the catalogue. Michael Korn was at the Royal College of Art at the time, and he was working on these 5 quick wins, one of which was about the curtains, because you can imagine sweeping a curtain past and getting it with some infection, and then someone else grabs the curtain, right? So he made something called Quick Screen, which is this sort of very wipeable, rather beautiful, because you can stick a photo on it, roller blind of a screen. So nicely collapsible and quite wipeable. And he decided, actually, to set it up as a startup. He span it out, and he became the founder. And the point is that he spent just about every day going out to the hospitals and selling directly. He told me, I was catching up with him the other day, he said, when I drove past, I'd see a hospital, I'd stop, I'd go in my stuff, and I'd sell. And the point is, as Rakesh has already said, did he make a sale in the first meeting? No, he did not. Did he then make a sale? Yes, he probably did. Did he make a sale over there? No. Why didn't I make a sale? Could he tell me what is wrong with my products? And he said to me, I have spent the last 17 years improving my products. Did that really happen with the bedside cabinet and the commode? Not really. There was maybe a little tweak. But it's actually the same thing is still on the catalogue 17 years later. So for me, one of the points here is that he is absolutely relentless in getting to customers, in sticking with the problem, in listening every day and making that work. And now, of course, as it says up there, he's in 250 hospitals. He's in 250 hospitals in the 250 hospitals in the USA. He's in every NHS trust in more than 15 countries worldwide. So this has been the biggest success of the program, but it kind of went round the system, and I love that. And that's the point. Michael is an example of a great startup founder. While SMEs are dutifully getting their products into the NHS catalogue, Michael chose, to get out there directly. And the point is that this is what another great learning about startups, really. The founders are actually a huge part of the result. Indeed, many people who work in venture capital in early stage businesses, they often ignore the product that a founder turns up with, and they only look at the founder, because the eventual success may well be because that product wasn't right. But my God, that founder is resilient. That founder is absolutely relentless. So again, do our public procurement processes always factor in the tenacity of the founder? Is that something we're allowed to value? So when we often talk about small businesses and startups interchangeably, I think we should realize that a business that's been around for decades and has stable revenues can be really quite different in its culture to an early stage startup. Again, I'm not saying one is better or the other, but you have to understand these are very different cultures. Someone was saying to me the other day, we need to stop talking about small business, we need to start talking about new business. So I think it is this freshness and this ambition that we need to understand is a slightly different culture from mere small size. So all in all, what I hope we can learn from startups is that we must set radical and ambitious outcomes for the innovation activities. How much faster, cheaper, and better can we make things? We must maximize our rate of learning, the continuous sort of mistake-making and learning, but also just never stop, always improve. And we need to discover and support the business leaders, the founders, who are passionate about staying close to customers and their needs, and who are relentless in their motivation to succeed. For those of you interested in this general topic, I thought I'd also add just a QR code if you want to zap one. This is a report that my colleagues put together at +X Innovation about our learnings around open innovation. The QR code will take you to the download page. Thank you for your attention. I will now look to see if there are any questions. If not, some to the floor. Yeah. So we've got here, inspired by Michael Korn of QuickScreen, how does one professionally manage the transition from being part of a large institutional challenge to taking inspiration from it and taking it out there directly as a startup? How does one professionally manage? Well, in that context, he just chose to do it. I think that, again, the urge of the founder is probably a bit like a migrating animal. I just have this absolute sense of needing to do things. But equally, one of the things, this sounds slightly selfish, sorry about this. One of the reasons why I sort of started the business that I did is to create a home for those people, because the innovation hubs that we create help people who come in who go, I think I want to start a company, but I'm not very confident about it. And by the time they've been through an accelerator or been part of the community, they go, yes, actually, I know what I'm talking about. People are telling me I am this CEO. I think I can do it. So for me, entrepreneurship is a psychological journey, perhaps as the question asks, just as much as it is a practical journey. And so therefore, finding yourself in these pools of talent where everyone is on a similar journey can help you feel less unusual, put it that way. Question here.
Hi, Matt. It's so interesting to hear you talk about a project that I was on the sidelines of 17 years ago looking in, and it's nice to actually reflect, because we so rarely do that. I'm just trying to understand what the key lesson is, because obviously the impact was for the NHS. So if other large organizations are trying to get solutions for a challenge, is the lesson, one, go straight to the SMEs, or is it about making the process much more flexible so that actually there is space for people to kind of come through these different gaps?
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, for me, the learnings are that actually, firstly, it worked very well. Actually, the department was known as sort of design demonstrations and challenges almost. So there was a demonstrative part of this in some ways. And so as I referred to with the Secretary of State sort of opening it and all of the other challenges we did around dementia care and employment and design out crime and things like that, ultimately it was a lot of trying to lobby, perhaps, of the possibility of design-led innovation. So to that extent, both from the Royal College of Art and the Design Council, I think it demonstrated quite well that there were other ways of doing things. And one of the great advantages, actually, of physical innovation is it's quite graphic. And you sort of say, wow, I can really see here, compared to a process, I can really see innovation in action. So from that point of view, I think the learning is that the concept car nature of it worked quite well. But yes, beyond that, I'd say that I think it wasn't as sophisticated as it needed to be, possibly in terms of the sheer variety of types of entrant that should be in there. As I evolved the practice in subsequent years, I definitely was drawing in startups and founders, not just existing manufacturers. So I made that change. But I think also maybe we hadn't had spent enough time really taking seriously that onward development process and asking questions around how the procurement process will help, and then whether or not people should be going around the procurement process as Michael did. But then that's always the power of crowdsourcing. Someone like Michael is he's just almost, he could be seen as anti-establishment. And if we're in the establishment, we're going to be thinking establishment, and he's anti-establishment. And that's the brilliance of bringing diverse actors together. You want some rebels in there as well.
Thanks. I'm actually a scale-up. We're successful in the private sector, but I guess it's a bit of a question around and a challenge as well about those procurement procedures. And you mentioned about getting around them, and it's a question for the audience and also yourself. How do we, who have been successful in the private sector, and we work community building, could apply that to social housing, but we're looking at really long sales cycles. So that's the issue that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, of the many, I suppose it's hundreds these days of startups that we've supported over the years, I have to say some really brilliant ones died because they ran out of money, especially while trying to set up some really big deals. Their sort of venture funding was running out, and they were trying to switch to sort of revenue funding, but the deal fell over. So I'm sort of empathetic to sort of the pain and frustration of that. I suppose I simply don't have enough answers, except what we do need to see is more communities of advanced innovators, because ultimately, I suppose, it's a bit, in some ways, how I used to feel 20 to 30 years ago going to conferences. I'd sort of go, well, who's in the market for innovation? Now, these days, everyone is, interestingly. But I think the point here is sort of, who are the people who really will push hard and almost break their perceived rules in order to draw you in? Because, of course, one of the ways in which innovation happens, you do have to ask the question, what rules do we need to break? And by rules, I don't mean really important rules that are there for good reason. I mean the perceived rules that sort of get in the way. So ultimately, even within a large organization, you get the mavericks within the large organization who know how to play the system and not do overly naughty things, but maybe slightly naughty things, but in the good interest. But I think it's, how do you find those people? And so, yeah, I certainly don't have enough answers. Maybe there are others like Bloom and IPEC that know where do you find these fantastic sort of lean forward people within organizations that really will move heaven and earth to be a bit maverick and accelerate things and not accept the status quo. So I think there's just not enough of that going on, which is why moments like this are so important, I think, to spread the ambition for faster and more powerful procurement processes. Yeah.
Yes, hopefully that's why these people are here.
Yeah, so maybe they're in the room, I think it's the networking. Yeah. I think we've got sort of the 1 minute warning, so either there's a final question, or I think there was one here, one final one here, which I'll try and answer. How do you quantify the value of learning in a public sector organization and use that to show value for money against funding? That's a good question. I think what I meant about learning was, I suppose, it is to do with speed of execution, ultimately. Learning is about learning what doesn't work and what does work. And typically, as I was trying to indicate, that sort of learning process and accelerating it is about creating greater velocity, as Agile would put it. And so ultimately, the question here is, how do we move faster? And certainly when I was in the world of private sector innovation, we used to say, how fast is fast? In healthcare, 2 years was fast. These days, in AI, 2 weeks is fast, I think. So ultimately, I think actually trying to do things faster to a similar standard of quality, that would be one of the ways I'd immediately say you could begin to measure it. So learning itself is an intermediary state, or sort of a component. It's an enabler of accelerated development. Great. Thanks very much.